Hi, my name is Naila Kabeer. I'm a professor of gender and international development at the London School of Economics. This is a field, gender and international development, in which I've been working for many years. I focus very much on gender issues in the larger economy, but I also focus on doing ground level field work with ordinary men and women to try and understand how they make sense of their lives and build a better future for themselves.
Sometimes we have to allay people's fears about coming on the show because they hear the word renegade and they go, what's this about? But you were worried that you might be on with someone like Jordan. We've never had somebody come and say, do you know what, I'm worried about Meet the Renegades because we might stick me in the same category as the page 3 model.
Well, you know, a renegade can mean anything. And it may mean trying to put a lot of very unlikely people together.
It is. But we need them to have done a bit, and you certainly have. I want to start by talking a little bit about your home country. Muhammad Yunus has made a huge impact in Bangladesh, and you moved there when you were very young, is that right? Why did Muhammad Yunus, when he was launching the microcredit or microfinance movement, why did he target women?
Well, there's two bits, I think, to that story. One is that when he went with his students for a field visit to a village in Bangladesh, and people laboured under the impression that most poor people were wage labourers, landless wage labourers. And I think he started to talk to a woman who was weaving baskets or something and found out she was doing it for a living, but that she could only get the material on credit from some very usurious moneylender, you know, paying very high interest rates. So he offered her some of his money to do it, and he forgot about it, but I think she somehow managed to pay him back, and he was very impressed with that. And I think that sparked off something in his head about the fact that women were earning, self-employed, and could be reliable to pay back. But my recollection is that he didn't start out with primarily women. I think there were women, there were men. But over time it became very clear that it was women that would repay the loans far more faithfully than men did. So I think little by little we saw a shift. So it wasn't sort of a big ideological thing of targeting women. It became much more pragmatic thing that they paid back.
A lot of your work, or almost all of it now, is looking at labour markets, access to labour markets. And when we look at labour markets globally, the small man, woman, hasn't really been positively affected by globalisation. Now, is that the case?
I think it kind of depends a little bit what your starting point is. So in countries like Bangladesh, where women were denied the opportunity to work and denied the opportunity to go out of the house, most wage labour opportunities went to men. In those kinds of countries, Morocco, Tunisia, etc., what globalization did is it brought in new industries that favored female labor because it was more cheap, less organized. So there you saw new opportunities emerging from a situation of very few opportunities, or just very badly paid agricultural wage labor. So from that perspective, it was an expansion of opportunities. For women in other parts of the world, it meant competing on a global stage and with people who could be paid much lower wages. So you've seen the rise of precariousness everywhere as people start to compete to try and undercut each other. So in that sense, you know, there's partly a positive side for those who were denied opportunities. But in general, the kind of jobs that is given rise to in an era of intense competition has been jobs without any security, without any protection. And people are discouraged from organising.
Are you of the view that you actually need people to organise and have strong unions to keep that aspect of the economy alive? Because the neoliberal view is, you know what, 0 hours, smash up the unions, liberalise everything, liberalise everything. I mean, that's not an effective way to run a society, is it?
Well, we've seen the consequences.
And what are they? Just from your point of view, where does the worker stand today?
The worker stands today with very few legal or organizational protections against a power of global capital. Capital that can move anywhere in the world.
Or threaten to move, which is as effective.
Yes, as effective. So I think it's been and states have tried, because they want capital, they want foreign investment, have dismantled the kinds of protections. So we're seeing a very, very unequal playing field, between capital and labour. And of course, although, foreign investment, capital flows moves in quite slightly less visible ways, the movement of labour carries consequences, again, that we are seeing today. And labour moves because there are fewer opportunities in some places and more opportunities in others. But labour is up against, competing against local labour. So there's a much more kind of immediate human consequences. And yet, because of the unevenness of the world and the inequalities of the world, I think Branko Milanovic talks about the citizenship premium, the birth premium. Where you're born is going to determine what you're going to earn. And someone in Rwanda is never going to earn even a fraction of what someone in England can. So that, logic of movement is there. And the only solution to it is to, in a sense, look for greater equality in opportunities across the world.
But, I mean, the forces you're fighting are phenomenal. Because you've got weak politicians or a weak political class, generally. They use the word competition. So you're seeing in the UK now, politicians like George Osborne, even the most rabid Tory would have to concede he's been weak when it comes to standing up to corporate power.
He's just reduced tax for corporate power, I think, since Brexit.
But this is a problem. So post-Brexit, he says to corporations, we're going to reduce the tax, which all in the name of competition. But man on the street gets duped again because wages get suppressed, there's more competition within the workplace. So how do you begin to explain to people that this isn't actually a good idea? Now, they know innately, they know, okay, but what can you just explain to us what the natural flow of events are? If you give corporates all this power and allow them to run the labour markets as they are, what's the logical conclusion of that?
Well, the logical conclusion of that is that they will avoid contributing to the collective good, either through the provision of jobs. We've seen jobs are being spread all over the world, and the kind of growth strategies we have are not very job creating. They will refuse to contribute to the collective good through taxation, and we've seen that not only are they given very favourable terms of taxation, but they also have all these loopholes, etc. And we see less and less of what is being produced benefiting the vast majority of people. But what I think the failure has been is that somehow the attention has been shifted away from the corporations and the invisible financiers to the public sector as being a part of the problem. I think Osborne has managed to, the Tories have managed to play that very well. And to immigration. And, every economist will tell you that immigration has been a boon. It has provided services, etc., that people are not prepared to provide here. But the scapegoat is now, it was the public sector, teachers, doctors, etc., earning too much, and now it's immigration. So all the time, I think, I don't understand why people don't focus on where the wealth is concentrated and ask, is that fair?
Well, let's do that. So let's take an example, right? So 10 years ago, a Polish drywall labourer, for instance, on a building site in London, would earn a significant percentage less than a British worker, right? And work as hard, if not harder. So, and as talented and skilled and all. Over that 10 years, they're just about at parity now, right? Who has benefited from that wage suppression for that migrant worker?
In this country?
In this country over that 10 years. Well, it's the shareholders of the building companies, it's the share price, it's the CEO, it's the people
who benefit from the wealth that is invested,
right,
but not from the labour that
right.
is
So then you start pointing the finger where it should be pointed, which is at maximising shareholder value, ridiculous remuneration for CEOs who can't add the kind of value that they say they're, and all the apparatus that goes around management now, who are also overpaid. Why aren't we having that debate?
I think somewhere along the line, because of questions around identity and identity politics, we kind of lost sight of class politics. And I think it's, in a sense, it's fractured class politics. That there's a lot of, the discussion about immigration is about people's identities, not about them as laborers and workers. So I think part of the story is that. Part of the story is the media is now extremely powerful and is able to focus public attention on stories that really conceal, that distract attention from what's going on. I think I was very struck how quickly we moved from the banking sector and the crisis to looking at MPs' expenses. But the amount of money that MPs were fiddling were tiny compared to the amount of money that had been going, that had been made in the banking sector. Yet, it wasn't that long after the crisis that we suddenly shifted attention to looking at people fiddling their expenses around, a lawn or, whatever it was.
A duck house.
Yes, a duck house.
Often you hear politicians saying we live in an economy, our economy, our economy. And it drives me mad because actually you live in a society, but Thatcher, no such thing as society, only the economy. How then do you start to say to people, these are your citizen rights, you should be, it would be good if you were engaged and asked for them, because this then makes a healthy democracy electorate?
It's a self-fulfilling prophecy, in a sense, that we are living in an economy. That the way that the whole neoliberal, consumerist, the consumer's sovereign ideology and practice has played out, it has fragmented society. It has put a huge strain on people's ability to act in solidarity. It's destroyed or certainly undermined the unions, but even other forms of solidarity around
like
community.
What?
Well, communities have been, broken up. Housing has become too expensive. People are having to live wherever they can find. So even those neighborhood communities are going. And people are living, well, either they're just living, to earning enough to just survive, or they're driven by this consumerist, set of ideals. So in a sense, it's almost, you've taught a society into place that is driven precisely by the values of the market. And I think, that's, and one of the things that I've been very fascinated by is what are the limits to the market? What are the limits to commodification? If everything has to be provided to the market, care, love, everything, what does that do to us? Never mind as citizens, but just as human beings.
It's a preposterous idea that the market can deliver everything.
No, I think it is. But the very fact that we're having debates, people like Michael Sandel and I think it's Deborah Satz, and the fact that they're debating, should there be some limits to the market, is indicative of the fact that there seems to be a strong ideology that says there are no limits. Commercial surrogacy, sex work, care work, everything is now being kind of outsourced to the marketplace. And we lose something along the way, I think. So I'm not, I am interested in the arguments about why there should be limits, but I worry very much that we are ceasing to be a society and becoming one big marketplace.
The thing that strikes me about your work and implementing your work is that on one hand what you want is liberalisation of the labour market, or maybe liberalisation is the wrong word, but access
to job opportunities.
To job opportunities. Yes. Gender specific?
No, access for all. I think, in fact, the less gender specific these jobs are, the better. In other words, I think there's too much segregation in the labour market.
And that would then get rid of gender-related pay, would
that
it? Would
get rid of
because that's a prehistoric idea as well, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, there are all these big reports coming out, from McKinsey and I think World Economic Forum saying that if men and women were equally distributed across the labour market, then we would see a huge increase in per capita GNP. There are flaws, I think, in that argument. But the point is that if you want to make the best of a society, then you have to use the talents of all people and not channel some into a narrow range of jobs and others into a much wider range of jobs. So what I would, and the reason I harp on in a sense about jobs is that, again, it goes back to my childhood, you know, growing up in a country where women were denied work and were always dependent on a man, you know, on a son, a father, a husband.
And why was that? Was that for control? Was that because of the chauvinism aspect? Was that the boys' club?
It's system. It's a particular form of patriarchy that wishes to assert control over women's movements in the public domain. In other parts of the world, let's say Africa, women are expected to go out and grow the food and be farmers and so on. There are other ways in which they might be oppressed and subordinated, but it's not through denying them the ability to work for a living. And so, you know, in West Africa, you have very successful women entrepreneurs and so on. In Bangladesh, you never saw women out on the streets, in the fields, in the marketplaces, as long as I was growing up. So in that sense, I've always grown up with a sense of what it means to be completely dependent on a man for the, you know, the entire course of your life. So it's from that perspective that I like, you know, I would like to see more opportunities in the labor market. I also think for a lot of women, it's a way of socializing, you know, of being a part of a bigger society rather than being stuck in a home. But of course, the jobs that we are getting now, and this includes the jobs that come to Bangladesh, are extremely exploitative. So this idea of being able to build a community around work, you know, what trade unions and so on were based on, that isn't as much a possibility. But there are other forms of organization, you know, so you are having women's organizations, you're having human rights organizations, you have one of the largest women's unions in the world is the Self-Employed Women's Association that works with women who are self-employed.
Why aren't we seeing the real opening up of these markets? What's happening? There's a blockage.
Well, what I think is happening is that while feminists have debated these issues for a very long time, these new reports that are talking about the importance of gender equality in the labour market being good for growth and, you know, good for society, good for the economy, that's coming from very unusual aspects, you know, the McKinsey report, Christine Lagarde, etc. But they continue to focus in on just labour market participation. So I think the struggle we have is to say it's not just about entering the labour market, but the terms on which you get jobs. So actually, we do now have a high-level panel on women's economic empowerment, which has people like Justine Greening and Christine Lagarde and all those people. And that is precisely about how do you improve the terms on which women engage with the market. You know, that it's not just enough to get them in there. One needs to, you know, work out what kind of assets they need to have good enterprises, what kind of skills, jobs, etc. Organization. And that's something that we keep stressing. You know, and that's going against the grain of things, you know, because obviously organizations are being dismantled. But we are also seeing the proliferation of new kinds of organizations. So
let's just talk about that then. What is the future? What's the organization of? So we're sitting here in 2030, right? What does the workplace look like? What does the organization look like? What does employment look like from your point of view?
Well, the people that I work with all work in the informal economy. In other words,
what does that mean?
Well, it means that they have no written contract. It's your 0 hours contract, that kind of thing. But we had them in the global south, you know, that was the norm, you know. Only a very small percentage of the labor force was in the kind of formal organization with written contracts and labor laws.
And where
and so on.
Geographically, where are you talking about?
Let's talk about South Asia, but it could talk about Middle East, could be talking about Africa, and many parts of Latin America. So these jobs, a lot of them are either in very small establishments, hard to organize, or self-employed in various kinds of enterprise and domestic workers and so on. So to organize them, you cannot use a formal trade union model. You have to look for ways of reaching out to these very isolated, precarious, you know, hidden workforce and find ways of bringing them together around a collective identity. And that collective identity is a worker's identity, you know. And so I think I've sort of been involved in looking at what is common to these efforts across the world, whether you're working with Burmese migrants in Thailand or agricultural wage workers in South Africa's, you know, vineyards. And what is common is asserting identity as a worker. which for women in particular has been quite a hard one to claim, because they're very often seen as, oh, they're just working for their families, they're working for their... But actually they are workers and they are contributing, and they should be acknowledged as part of the larger labour legislation and so on.
Isn't it initially difficult though to find these workers and get them to engage, because a lot of them are, well, they're scared. A lot of people in insecure jobs on 0 hours, if they say to their employer, oh, by the way, I'm a member of this organisation, they'd be worried to do so.
And yet they're doing it.
Great.
We are seeing, one of the organisations I worked with is in a city in India called Pune, where waste pickers, people who sort out the garbage, have organised, have formed a union, and have linked up with other waste pickers across India. Now that was the last thing you thought would have happened. Domestic workers, one of the most hidden. Yes, they have actually managed to have an ILO convention which recognises the rights of domestic workers across the world.
That's wonderful.
Yeah, and places like Argentina, you have the Domestic Workers Union negotiating across the board with the Housewives Union, the women who employ them, to talk about what they think is an acceptable set of conditions under which they can work. So, in all of this, people do show. I think the people who are hardest to organise are migrant workers, whether they're in the UK or anywhere. And because I think a lot of migrant workers are not documented, and so they find it quite hard to, put their heads above the parapet.
Doesn't that give a corporate an incredible edge? If you get your supply chain right, right, and if you say, and you're transparent about it, doesn't that, when you go and speak to your consumers and customers, give you an incredible advantage?
I think, first of all, the corporations that are most likely to respond to the sort of pressure to improve are those who are reputation conscious. Those whose...
Who are they now?
Nike, H&M, all these, they care about their reputation because they build their niche in the market through trying to sell a kind of lifestyle. They can't afford to be seen to be exploiting their workers.
But they're exactly the people who should be absolutely fanatical about getting their supply chain
they
transparent.
Are more active.
But that's not. But that's we're not there, are we?
No, we're not, because they will do what they have to do. They will only do as much as they have to do, which is work with the first tier of factories, the ones that they directly work with. They will not follow on to the subcontracting that goes on. So very often you will see quite, good conditions.
Yeah, but that's a show factory.
It is.
And let's not, and I'm not levelling any specific corporation, but I'm saying corporations in general use a show factory to say we're not doing sweatshops, and then the wider network of factories are sweatshops and they feed into that. True or false?
No, absolutely true. But
why aren't we sorting that out?
Who is we? People are trying.
You and I.
No, people are trying.
After this?
No, people are trying. I mean, one of the pieces of research I'm involved in is in a multi-country study on what has been the impact of the Rana Plaza disaster on...
Just explain what that was.
I think it's 2013, April 2013, when a huge building in Bangladesh, which housed many garment factories, crashed, killing over 1,000 workers, most of them garment workers.
And was it a British company?
There were many different companies, including
right.
British, including, I think Primark was there and so on.
Right.
And that was one of the biggest tragedies. And it is very interesting that it was mainly garment workers that died. Although many other kinds of commercial establishments were in that building, but it was the garment, they knew there was something happening. There was crack in the ceiling. Everybody else stayed away. The garment workers were forced in. So that has, been a kind of a wake-up call to many sectors of the industry, and they formed two kind of conglomerates around improving labour standards, safety standards. So now we want to study and see exactly how much has changed.
The size of the problem is massive. Is it scalable? Is it surmountable? Or do we use the fact that there's downturn, global deflation, just as another excuse to kick the can further down the road and say, sorry guys, you're lucky to have a job at all?
No, people, when they talk in those terms, this is an insurmountable problem, we need a revolution, we need to nationalized.
Is the language too big?
No, it's too big. And I think it takes hope away. So,
and induces cynicism. Which is endemic at the moment, certainly in Britain.
And I think that my strategy, or the way that I remain relatively optimistic, is to look constantly for the ways in which people do stand up to power and do organize and do show a willingness to put the collective interest first, and that's why I think I'm interested in workers, and because I think quite a lot of the more positive examples in the world is coming from that.
From a leadership point of view, that's what we need now, because we can see how quickly cynicism can take over, and that sense of despair. Give us three things that you're optimistic about, or three measures that you take now, which are optimistic and forward-looking, which would begin to allow access into labour markets, decent citizens' rights, and gender-neutral better pay and working conditions. In one sentence.
Well, I think around citizenship in this country, I certainly think we need proportional representation, and that's a doable demand.
Right, and that's in the UK.
And that's in the UK, and I think everywhere else we need procedures and systems in place that are most likely to involve as many people's voices as possible. So we need good representation.
Proportional representation.
As a means of that. That would be one.
Access to labour markets.
Access to labour markets, I think we need to invest in affordable care facilities, because as long as women are charged with the responsibility of looking after the sick, the elderly, the children and so on, their ability to participate in the labour market is always going to be restricted.
So we've got proportional representation, we've got investment in care services. How do you make sure that everybody, regardless of gender, gets a fair crack of the whip?
It would be about building bargaining power. It would be, and to build bargaining power, you need to build the kind of unions, organizations, and so on. Because I think one of the reasons for the gender wage gap is because employers can get away with it. And interestingly, I think one of the studies that I've been I've cited very frequently is that the greatest progress that has been made around questions around, let's say, violence against women and, the legislation you need, the protective services you need, the greatest force behind that has been the existence of an active women's movement. So I think on the gender side, what we need is a very strong and active women's movement, which can feed into building bargaining power in the economy.
You're one of the few economists who come and we speak to, who speak so much about the human being. Well, I mean, a lot of the economists we talk to do, but generally economists talk about spreadsheets and rational people. And
well, I'm one of the few economists you probably talk to who does field work, who actually goes and talks to the people that they study.
God, yeah, absolutely revolutionary idea.
Yes, so a lot of economists just take the statistics that have been collected by someone else and work with them.
That's dangerous.
One of the reasons I do it is because so much of economics has been developed with the industrialized societies in mind. And when they come to talking about poorer countries in the global south, they simply try and extend their model, sort of add a variable here or a factor there. And that doesn't work. So really what I'd like to do is use conversations with people working in labour markets in these countries to offer us a slightly different perspective about how markets work, how society, and they're kind of intrinsically bound up with each other, markets and societies and homes and households.
Naila, thank you so much for coming in. This is a Meet the Renegades pin. It's for those who think differently. You certainly do. Good luck with the field work.
Thank you very much.
For your time.